Hello everyone and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah share. We're holding in Mishnah Berurah Chelik Daled, and Mirz Hashem today we will be learning Daf Reish Lamed Vav Amid Beis, continuing to learn the halachas of Eruvei Chatzeros. We pick up today on Reish Lamed Vav Amid Aleph, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines off the bottom near the beginning of the line with the words Chilkuhu b'mechitzos she'ein noigos latikra, right by the Ois Katan Chav Zayin for the Mishnah Berurah. Today's share will be audio only. Our learning today should be a schus for Achenu Kol Beis Yisrael Hanisunim Batzar Ubashivya Ha'imdim Bein Bayom Ubein Bayabasha Hamakim Yerachem Aleihem V'Yetziam Yitzar L'Rvacha Me'afela La'ira U'Mishiba L'Geula Hashta Bagalo V'Zvan Kariv and Yamar Amen. Our learning should be a schus for Refuah Shalema for Achya Gadol Ben Shemer Ben Esther Fradel, Yitzchak Ben Zion Ben Dusha, Rivka Bas Shiraleah, Chava Hadassah Bas Rezel Serel, Yeshua Levi Ben Ahuva Malkachana. They should all have a Refuah Shalema B'Sar Shar Chayla Yisrael. Our learning should be a schus. The Rabbeinu Shalom should watch over all of our brothers and sisters who find themselves in harm's way. Amongst them, Yoel Ben Michal, Moshe Aaron Ben Zisel Udal, Reuven Yisrael Ben Tamar. The Rabbeinu Shalom should watch over every member of Klal Yisrael B'chol Makaim Shehem. Okay, so let's dive back into the world of Siman Shin Ayin Sif Gimel. We're still over here in Sif Gimel. Again, 5 lines off the bottom in the Shulchan Aruch, Reish Lamed Vav Amid Aleph, Chilku b'mechitzos. So, we've been discussing this interesting case where you have Chamesh Chaburos. You have 5 disparate groups of people who have set up Dira in a tracklin. We explained that a tracklin is a structure. It's basically one large space. You have 5 groups that have come into this binyan, into this one big room, and they have divided it up with mechitzos in order to set up different living spaces, 5 different living spaces for the 5 different groups. This tracklin is located in a chotzer, and the shaila that we've been faced with is the tracklin. How does the tracklin contribute to the Eruvei Chatzeros? Does the tracklin make one unified contribution to the Eruvei Chatzeros because we view them as one group? Or do they have to give 5 different contributions to the Eruvei Chatzeros because we look at the 5 groups as being independent of each other? Yesterday, we spoke about a case where the 5 groups divided up their living spaces using mechitzos magios latikra. They put up curtains, and the curtains go all the way up to the ceiling. Now remember, these are mechitzos geruos. They're flimsy, so to speak, mechitzos. They're only curtains. We're not talking about studs and sheetrock, but they are mechitzos that go all the way up to the ceiling. And the Mishnah Berurah told us not only do they go all the way up to the ceiling, but they're also fastened to the floor at the bottom. So while they are mechitzos geruos, but they still are mechitzos. So this is the case that we spoke about yesterday. The 5 groups, they divided up their living spaces using these mechitzos geruos that go from the floor till the ceiling, or at least within 3 tvachim within the sheer limud of the ceiling. The Mechaber told us that in that case, it's going to depend where the Eruvei Chatzeros is being placed. If the Eruvei Chatzeros is being placed in one of the other homes of the Chatzer, remember the way we described the scenario. We have a Chatzer that has 4 individual private homes, let's say. I'm just making up that number, but there are, let's say, 4 private homes in the Chatzer, and then there's this tracklin. So the Chatzer definitely has to make it Eruvei Chatzeros. If the Eruvei Chatzeros is going to be placed, let's say, in home number 2, so the Eruvei Chatzeros is not being placed in the tracklin, it's being placed in one of the other homes in the Chatzer. In that case, the Mechaber told us, then the 5 groups that are in the tracklin have to make 5 different contributions. They have to make 5 independent contributions to the Eruvei Chatzeros. If you look back at yesterday's share, we gave one explanation according to Rashi. We gave another explanation according to the Rashba. If, however, the Eruvei Chatzeros is being placed in the tracklin, then we said we can view all 5 groups that are in the tracklin as being all together in one bias. After all, they are all living together under the same roof. And since they're the bias, shehaniach bias ha'erev, since the erev is being put in their bias, The halacha always is that the bias that has the Erev doesn't make a contribution to the Erev, and then this traklin would not make any contribution to the Erev whatsoever. In a nutshell, that's the halacha that we learned yesterday. Now we continue in the Mechaber. Now, says the Mechaber, how about chelku b'mechitzai she'ein noigos latikra? Let's say these curtains, these mechitzais geruos, they don't go all the way up to the ceiling, or at least to the sheer limud of the ceiling. Then, says the Mechaber, afilu in b'nei hachotzer noistim eruvan be'echad misha'ar batei hachotzer. In that case, even if the Eruve Chatzeros is going to be placed in home number 2, even if the Eruve Chatzeros is going into one of the other homes of the Chatzer, not to the traklin, where in yesterday's case we said that in that case all 5 groups have to give 5 independent contributions to the Erev, but today, in today's case, where the mechitzais are even more flimsy, they don't go all the way up to the ceiling. Dai be'erev echad l'chol hachamesh chaburos. In this case, the Mechaber says, since their mechitzais don't go all the way up to the ceiling, then even though the eruve chatzeros is being put in one of the other bottom of the chatzer, in this case, all 5 groups in the traklin would make only one unified contribution to the Erev because they are considered to be one group, they're considered to be one bias. Says the Mishnah Berurah Katan Chav Zayin, if they separate themselves with curtains that don't go all the way up to the ceiling, says the Mishnah Berurah, this halacha would be true, even if in this case the mechitzais could be real bona fide mechitzais. They could be made out of studs, 16-inch on center and sheetrock. They could be made out of boards, and they could even be made va'avonim, says the Mishnah Berurah. Even if they're brick mechitzais, va'afilu gevayhais yoser me'asara. So if you have brick walls separating the 5 different groups, and the brick walls are more than 10 tefachim tall, so 10 tefachim is usually the shear of a mechitza. But if these are interior partitions in the traklin, and they don't go all the way up to the ceiling, they are not considered to be partitions. And therefore, in this case, if the Erev is being put in one of the other batei hachatzer, dai be'erev echad, all 5 groups only have to make one unified contribution to the Eruv Chatzeros, to Kebayas Echad Dami, because they're considered to all be living in one house. So again, today's halacha number 1 that we're learning is, you have the 5 different groups that are setting up shop in the traklin. They have separated their living spaces using mechitzais, but the mechitzais do not go all the way up to the tikra. They don't go all the way up to the ceiling. Therefore, they are not considered to be divided. And since they're not considered to be divided, they're considered to all be living in one bias. Therefore, if the Eruve Chatzeros of this Chatzer, even if it's being put in one of the other bottom of the Chatzer, yes, they have to make a contribution, because the bottom line is that the traklin is a residence inside this Chatzer. So this residence, the traklin, does have to make a contribution to the Eruv Chatzeros. If not, it'll bring down the entire Eruv, but they only have to make one contribution because they're considered to be all living in one bias. Says the Ramah, 4 lines off the bottom, Haga. How about in mikzasan asu mechitzais umikzasan loy asu? Let's say the 5 different groups living inside this traklin, let's say 3 of them made divisions in between them using mechitzais that go all the way up to the tikra, but the other 2 only divided themselves with short mechitzas that don't go up to the tikra. So in mikzasan asu mechitzais and mikzasan loy asu, so you can understand what the halacha will be. Oisan she'asu, the groups that divided themselves with mechitzas that go up to the tikra, heim mechulakim, they're considered to be independent diurin in the chatzer, and therefore they're going to have to give an independent contribution to the Eruv Chatzeros. But va'osid shaloyasu, but the other groups who did not make mechitzas that go up to the tikra, heim kimishutafin, they will be considered to be one group. So if 2 groups decided to lock themselves off with mechitzas that go up to the tikra, those 2 groups will have to make their own independent contribution to the Eruv Chatzeros. But the other 3 groups, that are only separated with partitions that go up to the tikra, they're considered to be one unit. So at the end of the day, this traklin is going to be making 3 contributions to the Eruv Chatzeros. 2 of the groups will make their own independent contribution. The other 3 groups are going to make 1 joint contribution. Says the Mishnah Berurah, also bechitzos, if some of them made bechitzos hamagios letikra, and some of them did not, then the ones that did not, is kat lamed, hem kimishutafin, pirish. The groups that did not separate themselves with bechitzos that go up to the tikra, they're going to be considered 1 unit, and they're going to give 1 joint contribution to the Eruv Chatzeros. Says the Mechaber Vayter 3 lines off the bottom near the end of the line. Let's make the traklin a little bit more complicated. Now the traklin is a multi-story structure. So now, if you have a multi-story structure, and you have one group is on the first floor, one group is on the second floor, one group is on the third floor, etc., etc., if we're not talking about 5 groups that are all in one big space, and they're just separated by some kind of mechitzos geruos, like curtains, but instead we're talking about 5 groups that are in one structure, but they're on 5 different floors, so they're really, really, really separated. And that's why the Mechaber says, then, in such a case, even if the Eruv Chatzeros is going to be located in the traklin. Now, yesterday we said that sometimes when you have the Eruv Chatzeros in the traklin, then we consider the entire traklin to be the bias that the Eruv is being placed in, and the bias that the Eruv is placed in usually doesn't make a contribution to the Eruv. So let's say in yesterday's halacha we said, if the 5 groups in the traklin separated themselves with bechitzos that go all the way up to the tikra, and the Eruv is being placed in the traklin, well then we could consider the 5 groups to be one unified group. Why? So one of the explanations we gave yesterday is, well, they are all living under one roof, right? And the Eruv is coming to them, so their Iker Dira is in the traklin, So in that case, we could say, all right, they're bias echad, and they don't have to give anything. Because all 5 groups together are one group in the traklin. The traklin is the bias that the Eruv is being put in. They don't have to make a contribution. But now, says the Mechaber, if they're mamish separated, if they're really, really, really separated, they're on different floors, or like the Mishnah Berurah says, or even if they're not on separate floors, even if they're on one floor, but they're separated with bona fide mechitzos that go from floor to ceiling, but real mechitzos, not mechitzos geruos. They're separated with stone walls, or they're separated with sheetrock walls, but real internal interior partitions. Well, in that case, even if the Eruv is coming to them in the traklin, each one of the different groups is going to have to make a contribution to the Eruv, because it's true that they all live under one roof, right? But this is like an apartment building with separate apartments in it. There's no way that we're going to be considering them as being one unit if they're separated with real, absolute, bona fide mechitzos. Says the Mishnah Berurah Lamed Aleph, Ba'aliyos Mamish, Kvar Kasavnu, the Chavetz Chaim reminds us that we already wrote, Tuhu Adin, Kisheneschalku Chaburais, Al Yedei Mechitzos Kevuos. The example of the Mechaber is that they are on different floors. But they don't have to be on different floors. They could be on the same floor. But they're separated by real interior partitions, kigayin shel nisarim, partitions made out of boards, or out of sheetrock, or out of brick, and they go, and since they go up to the ceiling, these are real bona fide mechitzos, and they are certainly considered to be 5 different groups. And therefore, as Kat Lamed Beis, tzricha kol chabura, each chabura has to make a separate contribution. Even let's say this traklin was actually the only building. Let's say there are no other homes in the chutzner. Let's say there isn't even really a chutzner. Let's say you have an apartment building located on a street, right? So there really is no chutzner, so to speak. But if you have 5 apartments inside that building, and they're separated by real interior partitions, if they want to be able to transfer from one of their houses from one of their apartments to another apartment, they have to make it a Ruvei Chatzeros, because there's no way, even though they're in one building, we're not going to consider them to be a bias echad. They're separated by real interior solid partitions that go from floor to ceiling. They're not mechitzos geruos, they're mechitzos gemuros. They're real mechitzos. So they would have to make an Ruvei Chatzeros. Okay, against the backdrop of the halachas that we've been learning until now, says the Mechaber, second line off the bottom at the end of the line, Aval, however, a case that stands in a little bit of a contrast to what we've been learning until now. Aval, mi sheyesh loy malamed oy sofer beveisai. Let's say somebody brought into town a malamed. They didn't have the structured yeshivas, let's say, that we have now. So the townspeople sometimes would get together, they would bring in a malamed, and somebody who had an extra room in his house would put up the malamed. They would give him a room to sleep in. Avamishi yesh la malamed, or a cipher, or they needed a cipher in town. So they brought in a cipher, and you have him bebeisai. You give him a room in your house. V'chein, another case, talmidim haloimdim b'fnei harav. You have, so to speak, a yeshiva. How does this yeshiva work? The Rosh Yeshiva has a nice big house. So the Rosh Yeshiva brings in talmidim, and he gives up 4 bedrooms of his house to be the dormitory. So you have 4 bedrooms in the house that have yeshiva bachurim living in them. Boy, the cleaning bill must be epic. V'chein talmidim haloimdim b'fnei harav. You have talmidim that are coming and living in the Rebbe's house. V'darim bebeisai. They live in his house. Kol echad b'chadroi. Each one of them has his own room. So now the question is like this. You have got a fellow, has a big house, right? He's living there with his family. He has 4 extra bedrooms. He has a malamed in room number 1. He has 2 yeshiva bachurim or 3 yeshiva bachurim in room number 2. He has a cipher in room number 4. You know what I mean? So he has other people that are living in his house, and each one of them has their own room. So now, do we look at this house as being like a shared rishus? Are we going to say that the malamed or the yeshiva bachurim aser on the owner of the house? Or are we going to say, let's say this house is in a chotzer with 5 other houses. So the balabas of the house, let's say the Rosh Yeshiva, he's making a contribution to the Ruvei Chatzeros. But how about the malamed? How about the yeshiva bachurim that have their own rooms in this person's house? Do they have to make separate contributions to the Ruvei Chatzeros? I mean, if we analyze this against the backdrop of what we've been learning until now, so let's say it's a contemporary house. If it's a contemporary house, then the malamed who has his own room, he has a living space that has mechitzos gemuros. It has real bona fide interior partitions that go from the floor to the ceiling. He's got his own room. He's completely cut off from the other people in the house. Maybe he has to make his own contribution to the Ruvei Chatzeros. Says the Mechaber, no. In these cases, turning to Reish Lamed Vav Amud Beis, afilu yesh lechol echad pesach besuach lechotzer. Even if each one of these rooms actually has its own exit to the chotzer, so we're going to make an even stronger argument to make an argument that the malamed or the yeshiva bachurim should be considered separate entities. Not only do they have their own rooms, not only are their rooms separated from the rest of the house with bona fide interior partitions, they also each have their own separate entrance to the chotzer. And maybe they even eat and certainly sleep in their own rooms. Einam oisrim. They don't aser on the bnei chotzer, meaning that they don't have to make their own independent contributions to the Ruvei Chatzeros, and they also don't aser on the balabayas. We're not going to say that the balabayas has to make it a Ruvei Chatzeros in his own house because his own house is a shared rishus. No, they are considered to be tafel to the balabayas. They're secondary to the balabayas. They're part of the balabayas' household. They're not considered to be independent units. Let's take a look here at the Mishnah Berurah. Says the Mishnah Berurah back on Reish Lamed Vav Amud Aleph Ois Kat Lamed Gimel. Aval Misha Yesh Loi Hatam. The reason for this halacha is Keva Chekula Mishtamshin B'Shal Bal Habayis. The Malamed, the yeshiva bachurim, they're not really independent. They use all of the Balabayas' resources, ba'afia, when they need bread, they bake in the common kitchen, in the Balabayas' kitchen, or even if they don't bake on their own, they eat the baked goods from the Balabayas' kitchen. Ubishul, they get their meals from the Balabayas' kitchen. Ubechol davar, they have their own bedroom where they sleep. But all of the tashmishay habayis, when it comes to eating and drinking and everything else, they are part of the Balabayas' household. Kashivi kulu kilu oichlu v'yeshenim b'makom echad. They are one member of the common household that belongs to the Balabayas. Va'afa pi sheyesh lehem pesach litzad hachotzer. Even if they have two doors to their room, they have one door that opens to the interior of the house, but they also have another door that opens up out to the chotzer. Nikraim al shem Balabayas. They're considered to be a member of the household of the Baal Habayis. They are not independent. Va'oid. And there's another reason for this halacha, and that is, let's take the case of the Malamed. So the town brought in a Malamed, and now Ruvain, who had an extra bedroom in his house, is lending a bedroom to the Malamed. The Malamed needed a place to sleep. He also needs a place to eat, right? So Ruvain is kind of like making a little bit of a bed and breakfast, but he's not charging. He has this guy living in his house. He's dependent on his kitchen, but he has his own room. Now he's lending the room to the guy. Says the Mishnah Berurah, we have what we call an umdana. There is a halachic assumption, which is that when Ruvain agreed to lend the Malamed a room, he didn't agree to lend the Malamed a room and give him bailus over the room, give him ownership over the room to the extent that he's going to create a halachic problem for Ruvain. Ruvain didn't agree to lend him space so that he should be able to aser on him and make it a Ruvain Chatzeros. But, says the Mishnah Berurah, but this halakha is only true if the space is being lent out to the Malamed, or it's being lent out to the yeshiva bachrim. But if you sold a room for the Malamed, or you rented a room to the Malamed, in that case, or even if you did only lend it, but maybe the Malamed has a kitchenette in his room, so he's not dependent on your home, then they are going to aser. They're going to have to make their own contribution to the larger Iruvei Chatzeros. And if there is no larger Iruvei Chatzeros, because this house is not located in a chotzer, the Balabayas is going to have to make an Iruvei Chatzeros with him, because his house is now a shared rishus. The Balabayas has his living room, dining room, kitchen, master bedroom, and a bedroom for his kids. And then there's also another room in this house that belongs to somebody else. Either it was sold to him, or it was rented out to him, or it was lent to him, but it was lent to him in such a manner that he doesn't need the rest of the house. He has a kitchenette, he does his own cooking in that room, he has a table in that room where he eats. In that case, he's independent. So he would have to make an independent contribution to the larger Iruvei Chatzeros. And if it's just a house on a street, then the Balabais would have to make an Iruvei Chatzeros with the Malamed if he wants to be able to transfer from his part of the house to the Malamed's part of the house, or the Malamed wants to come to the study and take out a volume of the Shas to learn the daf and take it back into his room. So he wants to transfer from the house into his study, into his bedroom. He's going to have an Iruvei Chatzeros. The dafka b'tziru shtei atayim b'yachad makilinin, because we can only be makel when we have both of these rationales to be makel together. One is that the room is only being lent to them, and the other prerequisite is that he uses the tashmisha abayis of the balabayis. The chol zeh b'shaloi hoyel balabayis etzlam tfisas yad. However, there is another factor we have to take into consideration, and that's the factor of tfisas yad. The elavachi, if the Balabayas has a tfisas yad in the Malamed's room, so then the mutter b'chol gavdi v'chadal b'sif beis. If the Balabayas rented out a room to the Malamed, and he owns the refrigerator in the room, and he owns the dresser in the room, and he owns the beds in the room, well then, even though it's rented out to the Malamed, the Balabayas has a tfisas yad, and since he has a tfisas yad, it's considered a bayis echad. Okay, Oiskat Lamed Hey, the final Mishnah Berurah on this very complex sif, says the Mishnah Berurah, the Mechaber said, Einam Oisrim. In the case of the Malamed, the Yeshiva Bachrim, the room is lent out to them. They have even if they have a Pesach Pasuach L'chotzer, even though they have their own rooms, but since the room is only lent to them, and since they come on to the Balabayas for their cooking and their eating and everything else, Einam Oisrim. Oiskat Lamed Hey, Al Anshe Chotzer, V'loi Ze Al Zeh. They don't aser on the larger Anshe Chotzer. If this house is in a chotzer with other batim, and they made in Yeruvah Chatzeros, this Malamed, these Yeshiva Bachrim do not have to contribute to the Yeruvah Chatzeros. They also don't aser on the Balabayas. Moving along to Sif Daled, end of the top line, Reish Lamed Vav Amud Beis, says the Mechaber. We get a little bit easier now. Says the Mechaber, Anshe Chotzer shayu kulam oichlim al shulchan echad. Let's say you have our standard issue case that we've been using over and over again. You've got a chotzer, and in the chotzer there are 21 units. But, there's one fellow in the chotzer who's a very generous guy, and he has a very, 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 very large house, and he has a massive dining room, and everybody eats by Ruvain de Gvir. There's Ruvain de Gvir in unit number 15, massive dining room. He invites everybody over, so everybody eats in the dining room in unit 15 together. They all eat together in one room on one table. Even though everybody's got their own house in the chotzer and they all go home to sleep, this chotzer does not require in a Yeruvah Chatzeros. Because guess what? They all live together in unit 15, right? Let's take a step back for a minute. What does the Yeruvah Chatzeros do? We have 21 units. Everybody lives in their own house. Everybody eats in their own house. We need in a Yeruvah Chatzeros. What do? Everybody chips into a box of matzah. They put the box of matzah in unit number 15. Now that everybody's box of matzah is in unit 15, we say that they all live in unit 15. Now you no longer need, now everything is good. Well, in the case that the Mechaber just gave you, everybody is eating together in unit 15. You basically have an Yeruvah Chatzeros. So you don't need an Erev because everybody lives in unit 15. Says the Mishnah Berurah, this is true even if they're not all eating Ruvain's food. Ruvain has a massive dining room and he has good air conditioning. So he's inviting everybody to come eat by him, but he's not giving them cholent. They're all bringing their own cholent. So they're all eating their own food, but they're all eating together in the same bias in the chotzer. The chotzer does not need in a Yeruvah Chatzeros. And this is true as Kat Lamed Zayin, even though Yesh Lo Bias B'fnei Atzmai, even though they each have their own house, Lelina for sleeping, V'lisha'ar Tashmishin, and for sitting down and Chazering Dirshu Shabbos afternoon, Ukidla Kamei. They all have their own houses. But since they all eat together in unit 15, even though they're eating their own food, it's considered like they all live there, and the chotzer does not need in Yeruvah Chatzeros. Going weiter, third line down, a little bit before the middle of the line. Okay. Let's say you have chotzer A. Chotzer A has 21 units in it. They all eat together in unit 15. Well, we just said that since they all eat together in unit 15, we consider them to be one big unified group. We look at it as if they all live in unit 15. Now, next door to Chotzer A, you have Chotzer B. Chotzer B, there's a fence between Chotzer A and Chotzer B, but it's got a gate. You could open up the gate and you could go back and forth between Chotzer A and Chotzer B. If you want to be able to transfer from the houses in Chotzer A to the houses in Chotzer B, or vice versa, or you want to transfer from a house in Chotzer A to the Chotzer in Chotzer B, or vice versa, you needed a Yeruvah Chatzeros between Chotzer A and Chotzer B. They need to join in an Yeruvah Chatzeros, right? So now, in Chotzer A, everybody's considered to be one happy family. In Chotzer B, you've got 20 separate units, and they don't all eat together in one home. Now they want to join in an Yeruvah Chatzeros. Okay, so the people of Chotzer A need to make a contribution to this Yeruvah Chatzeros. How many contributions do they make? Says the Mechaber, if the joint families in Chotzer A want to join in an Eruv Chatzeris with Chotzer B, Eruv Echad Lekulan, they only need one pas for the Eruv. Upas Echad Bilvad, Malichid La'isei Makom Sham Marvin Imai. What this means in English is usually in a standard issue case of Chotzer A and Chotzer B getting together for an Eruv Chatzeros, all 20 people from Chotzer A, all 20 people in Chotzer B, all have to give contributions to this big Eruv Chatzeros. But in our scenario, all the people in Chotzer A are considered to be one group because they all eat together in Unit 15. So they only make one contribution and they give one pas to the Eruv. And if the Eruv is actually coming into Chotzer A, they don't have to make a contribution to the Eruv at all. In that case, what would happen is the people of Chotzer B would get together. They would each make a contribution to the Eruv Chatzeros. They would bring the contributions to Chotzer A, and then that's it. They make it a Eruv Chatzeros. But the people from Chotzer A don't have to make a contribution because they're considered to be a bias echad, and they're the bias shemanichim by Eruv. So they don't have to make a contribution. Because they are all considered to be one. Says the Mishnah Berurah, in this case, the people of Chotzer A only have to make one contribution to the Eruv, and that contribution could be made by anybody in Chotzer A. And he doesn't have to hand it over to somebody else and say to him, be mezaka in this pas for all of the residents of Chotzer A. No, because there's only one resident in Chotzer A. They're all considered one unified group. Whoever hands over the pas from Chotzer A to the Eruv for Chotzer B is going to be doing it on behalf of everyone. Okay, let's go weiter. Says the Ramah Hagah. V'chein, a similar case where we're going to view a large group as being one. V'chein, harbe balabatim oichlim b'cheder echad. The case of the Mechaber was that everybody is getting together. They're all eating in Ruvain's massive dining room in unit number 15, and the Mechaber said they're all eating on one table. Says the Ramah Hagah, maybe Ruvain has a massive dining room, and he puts out place cards, and there's one round table for the people of unit number 1, there's another round table for the people of unit 2, there's another round table for the people of unit 3. They're not all eating on one table. They're all eating on individual tables that are set up for each unit, but they're all still eating in unit number 15 by Ruvain. That's the chiddush that the Ramah is coming to add. They're all eating in one room in unit 15, but it's kol echad al shulchanoi. But each one has his own individual table. Again, even though they all go home to sleep, Eruv echad lekulam, they're still considered one unit in the context of Eruv Chatzeros. Since they're not separated by mechitzos, this goes back to Sif Gimel. It's similar to the case of Sif Gimel, where you have 5 groups. If they don't have mechitzos that separate them, that go up to the tikra, they're considered one unified group. So too over here. It's true that they're each eating on a separate table, but they're not separated by mechitzos. Even if sometimes they put up a little bit of a mechitza between the tables to give the people sitting and eating by the tables a little privacy, that's not considered a mechitza. Since these are movable partitions that are only there for tznius, they're not there to make real mechitzas. They're not mechitzas. They don't divide them into separate groups. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Haramah Haisif, the chiddush that the Ramah is adding over here is the lav davkal shulchan echad. It doesn't have to be like the Mechaber said, that they're all eating in unit number 15 on one table. Even if they have individual tables, one for unit number 1, one for unit number 2, etc., etc. Since they're in one house, they're considered a unified group. It's comparable to the case of the 5 groups in the Traklin in Sif Gimel. If they don't have mechitzais hamagiyos l'tikra valgain, since the Rambam is making this comparison, it comes out even if there is a mechitza between the tables, but it doesn't reach the ceiling, or within the sheer lovin of the ceiling, it's as if it's not there. The Rambam said even if they put up partitions between the tables for tznius, since they're not there b'kliyos, they don't count. They ain't personally say they only put up these little mechitzais between the tables when people sitting at a table have a need for privacy. But they're not there to be real mechitzais. All right, let's go a little bit weiter. Let's start Sifhei. Says the Mechaber. If somebody eats in one place, the yashein b'makam acher, and he sleeps in another place. And the Mishnah Berurah says what this means is, you have somebody who has a house in Chatzar A, but he never eats in his house in Chatzar A. He has another place in Chatzar B, and he eats in Chatzar B. So we're talking about somebody who has a place in 2 different Chatzeros. He sleeps in one Chatzar, he eats in the other Chatzar. The question is, what's considered to be his Iker Dira? Wherever his Iker Dira is, he's going to be considered one of the diurin. He's going to be considered a resident of the chotzer that has his Iker Dira. And in that chotzer, he's going to aser. In that chotzer, he's going to have to contribute to the Eruv Chatzeros. And if he doesn't, he's going to bring down the Eruv. But in the other chotzer, he's not going to be considered a resident. So in that chotzer, he does not have to give to the Eruv Chatzeros. Which one is considered to be his residence? His Iker Dira is considered to be where he eats. Like we said, Pita Garam. The bread is the deciding factor. The food is the deciding factor. Visham Hu Oiser, and that's where he's going to be considered a resident that could aser on the other Bnei HaChatzer, and therefore he has to contribute to the Eruv Chatzeros. Hilkach, therefore, based on this halacha, the Mechaber gives us an interesting case. Ha'achin, you have brothers. You have a family that have got 6 siblings. There are 6 children, 6 sons in this family. Hilkach, ha'achin, brothers. Sha'oichlem beveis avihem. They eat in their father's house. They all go for Shabbos to eat by their father. Their father lives in Chatzar A. One brother lives in Chatzar B. Another brother lives in Chatzar C. Another brother lives in Chatzar D, etc., etc. But what does that mean that they live in the other Chatzeros? That's where their houses are, where they go to live and sleep. But where do they eat? They eat by their father. Their father's house is in Chatzar A. So they're not going to aser on either Chatzar. They're not going to aser on the Chatzar that they sleep in, because they're not considered a resident where they sleep. They're considered a resident where they eat. But they're also not going to aser on the Chatzar that they eat in. You know why? Because they don't eat in their own house, in the Chatzar that they eat in. They eat in their father's house. So they're guests by their father. So they're members of their father's household. So their father asers on the Bnei HaChatzer, and the father has to make a contribution to the Eruv. But they don't. Let's see this in the Mishnah Berurah. It says the Mishnah Berurah is cut men beis. V'yashen b'makam acher v'tzayin alarma b'chatzar acher. We're talking about 2 different chatzeros. It's cut mem gimel einam oisrim. Pirish loy b'makam ashena. These brothers aren't going to aser in the chatzar that they sleep in. Kishalo ervu im shar anche chatzar. If they don't contribute to the Eruv Chatzeros in the chatzar that they sleep in, it's not a problem. They won't aser on the other bnei chatzar because they're not considered residents of that chatzar. V'loy b'makam achila. They're also not going to aser in the chatzar that they're eating in. Shehem nigrarin acharavien v'yotzim be'eruvai, because they're considered to be part of their father's household because they're eating on their father's table, and their father's house is covered by the father's contribution to the Eruv Chatzeros. We're going to stop over here. We'll continue next time with the next case over here, 2 lines off the bottom in the Shulchan Aruch. Thank you so much for joining me for Limud HaTorah. Discussing Limud HaTorah should be making against Klal Yisrael. The Rebbe should send Yeshua's, Refuah's, Parnassah, Shidduchim to those in need. We should be zeicha to see the Biyaskal Tzedek, B'mher of Yameinu Amen. Be well.